he will speak of holy Aemulatio, Jerome's efforts to outdo the life of Antony.
Thank you very much, Antony. I was wondering what to put on my presentation, and I eventually decided that Salvador Dali's Temptation of St. Antony, with its numerous classical references, is one possible way to visualize this charmingly surreal text which we are dealing with. Moreover, one could argue that prima facie, the painting corresponds to the fact that the three lives of saints painted by Jerome, Vita Pauli, Vita Malchi, and Vita Hieronymus, were frequently described in the past by one or another variant of Edward Gibbon's verdict that, and I quote, "the only defect of these pleasing compositions is the want of truth and common sense." 20th century scholarship, which is less sweeping and perhaps more discerning, pointed out that there are major differences between the texts, and that it's hardly sensible to lump them together. Timothy Barnes, in his early Christian hagiography and Roman history, says that it becomes a serious bar to understanding when all three are treated as if they formed three parts of a trilogy, or when they are put on exactly the same level of historicity, whether all three are assumed to be fundamentally truthful, or all three are characterized as romances in monastic life. Interestingly enough, this fact was always recognized by the manuscript tradition, where the texts tend to be transmitted separately. From the many manuscripts that contain Vita Pauli, Vita Malchi, or Vita Hieronymus, only a small segment actually contain all three. While the life of Malchus is not even a biography, and the subject of life of Paul seems to have been a figment of Jerome's imagination, the life of Hilarion, as presented by Danuta already, is an entirely different matter. Following criticism from contemporaries who were not prepared to provide the carte blanche that Vita Pauli demanded from the faithful, Jerome's subsequent attempt was anchored in reality. The onslaught of his contemporaries is evident from the very beginning of the text, where Jerome complains about their skepticism. He says, "We despise the abuse of some who, as they once disparaged my hero Paulus, will now perhaps disparage Hilarion. The former they censured for his solitary life. They may find fault with the latter for his intercourse with the world. The one was always out of sight, therefore they think he had no existence. The other was seen by many, therefore he is deemed of no account." One has to be at least a bit forgiving, however, since Vita Pauli was among the earliest literary achievements of Jerome. It probably appeared before 381. It was of great literary quality and came to have enormous influence in the West. In his study on inventing an ascetic hero, Stefan Rebinic pointed out fine literary form of Vita Pauli. He was not the first one to do so. Famously, Richard Reitzenstein in Hellenistische Wundererzählungen speaks of a Kleinod der erzählenden Literatur, a gem of narrative literature, and indeed several scholars analyzed motifs and elements which Jerome borrowed from Greek and Latin literature of both pagan and Christian provenance when composing Vita Pauli. When working with earlier forms, Jerome was flexible. To quote again Rebinic, "Collections of examples and apophthegms, as well as miraculous stories, served him as framework for individual episodes. The predominant literary structures are modeled on the archetype of the classical novel and the classical biography. Terms such as romance of monastic life, encomium, travel, arithology, saint's life, therefore describe only one particular aspect of this work. Jerome mastered all varieties of the classical literary practice and integrated stylistic devices and narrative structures of pagan, especially Greek origin, into his writings, which proclaimed the new Christian message of the superiority of an ascetic lifestyle. His eclectic reception of classical examples in particular guaranteed his contemporaries an entertaining reading experience. There is one text that was particularly on Jerome's mind when he embarked on his hagiographic projects, the life of Antony, by Athanasius, translated from Greek to Latin by Jerome's friend and patron Evagrius of Antioch. This text was an ancient bestseller, highly influential. In a famous passage in the Confessions, Augustine mentions its role in his own conversion. For Jerome, Evagrius produced a golden standard. He actually quotes his very words in one of his polemical letters, De Optimo Genere Interpretandi. And he says, "In quoting my own writings, my only object has been to prove that from my youth up, I at least have always aimed at rendering sense, not words. But if such authority as they supply is deemed insufficient, read and consider the short preface dealing with this matter, which occurs in a book narrating the life of the blessed Antony." And there's another quote within the quote. The literal translation, he says, "From one language into another obscures the sense. The exuberance of the growth lessens the yield. For while one's diction is enslaved to cases and metaphors, it has to explain by tedious circumlocutions what a few words would otherwise have sufficed to make plain. I have tried to avoid this error in the translation, which at your request I have made of the story of the blessed Antony. My version always preserves the sense, although it does not invariably keep the words of the original. Leave others to catch at syllables and letters. Do you, for your part, look for the meaning." Evagrius followed this approach in his translation. This meant adding and occasionally improving, and in comparison to the previous Latin version, which was close to the original and stylistically less than impressive, Evagrius produced a rhetorical breeze of fresh air. Stefan Riminic thinks that it's quite likely that the example of Evagrius impelled Jerome to write the Vita Pavli. At least this instance showed him that there was no lack of an interested audience for such edifying lives on high literary level. It's not surprising, therefore, that numerous borrowings from Evagrius' translation could be detected in Jerome's text. He entered into competition with Athanasius' Vita Antony and its Latin translation. Hagendal, for instance, called his style sometimes rather exuberant. I would now like to take this observation one step further and use this concept of competition, of Aemulatio, which is a key concept when one tries to analyze Roman translation, for Jerome's life of Hilarion. Life of Hilarion is a new attempt to outdo the life of Antony, this time with a personality with significantly stronger historical credibility, to the extent that traces of its protagonist can still be found in independent secondary sources. But while its historicity poses intriguing questions of its own, recent decades became particularly interested in its narrative strategies. Its preface has a passage that sounds very much like a passage from Vita Probi in Historia Augusta. It's not clear who copied whom, but what matters is the fact that Jerome is echoing the Sallustian Bellum Catilinae, as well as Cicero's Pro Archia. But this was only a beginning. One can just imagine Jerome as a sort of a late antique Al Pacino in the scent of a woman thundering, "I'm just getting warmed up." Susan Weingarten, in her study on the Saints, Hagiography and Geography in Jerome, has shown how Jerome used and subverted a masterpiece of profane literature, namely Apuleius' Golden S. Weingarten analyzed a series of verbal and visual parallels, discovered a shared joke, and examples of shared vocabulary, as well as a series of shared images and functional parallels. Why these parallels? And why are they so explicit? Why are they not explicit? Jerome's ambivalence with classical authors is well known. Weingarten points out his letter 22 to Eustochium about being Ciceronian, not a Christian. Just as Hilarion, in his Christianity, surpasses his pagan rivals, the episodes in the Golden S appear to have been used by Jerome to show how Hilarion can go one better. The bawdy and indecent golden ass was used by Jerome as a basic antithesis for his Vita Hilarionis, as a pagan captive which has been shorn and converted to Jerome's ascetic Christianity. But what provided the inspiration for such a daring tactic? Paradoxically, I think, this very approach was partly motivated by the text Jerome himself was emulating, namely the life of Antony itself. Renascens famously showed how Athanasius employed the lives of pagan philosophers, specifically the life of Pythagoras by Porphyry. Other scholars, for instance Johann List, discussed parallels between the life of Antony and the life of Plotinus by Porphyry. And perhaps famously Ludwig Biller, in his Theos Aner, created a whole network of parallels between the holy men of antiquity, using texts such as Philostratus, life of Apollonius of Tyana, and the lives of sophists. The Pythagorean life by Iamblichus, the already mentioned life of Pythagoras, and the life of Plotinus by Porphyry, and the lives of philosophers by Eunapius. I went through the life of Antony using this type of framework, and the analysis produced a series of parallels. Like the pagan holy man, Antony is marked by early maturity, by special knowledge, such as the knowledge of approaching death, by ubiquitous ascesis, linked by Reitzenstein via direct quotation to the life of Pythagoras, by unusual capabilities, by benevolently authoritative approach towards nature, which sometimes gives the impression of a proto-Francis of Assisi, by disciples who come in barrels and eventually form a school, and by both wide circle of supporters as well as important adversaries. So, to sum it up, it seems that Jerome's Aemulatio went much further from mere content and style. It also included the narrative strategies and using pagan texts as models, following the example of the Israelites in the Exodus who despoiled the Egyptians of their gold and silver. There is, maybe to finish with this, of course a caveat, famously expressed by Barthelink. It's difficult to know which of the mentioned lives were known to Athanasius when he was writing the life of Antony, and the same could be said about Jerome. One can sense a similar self-realization with Susan Weingarten when she speaks about Jerome using Apuleius, she says, consciously or unconsciously. And to finish, clearly Jerome's efforts to outdo the life of Antony pose several difficult questions. To what extent did Jerome realize that his own strategy of using pagan sources mirrors the one in life of Antony? How much of this was calculated and how much was intuitive? And perhaps most importantly, how were Jerome's efforts actually perceived by his audience? These are the questions which will need answering, but perhaps at another occasion. Because as T.S. Eliot knew, love and life are free, but time is time and runs away. Those ages disagree. Thank you very much.